certify the meeting notice.
This meeting has been noticed in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204.
Clerk, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Here.
Councilmember Page?
Here.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Here.
Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Item D is changes to the agenda. Don't see any. We'll move on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I move to approve the consent agenda as written.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Thank you. Item F1, this is rescheduling the May 26th meeting to Tuesday, the 27th, because of the Memorial Day holiday.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I don't want to be here on Memorial Day, so I I would move that we reschedule the May 26th, 2025 City Council meeting to the next day, Tuesday, the 27th.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Next item, item G1, this is a public hearing on EASY 2025-4. This is vacating some easements to facilitate a property line adjustment. I think the information's in your packet. This is a public hearing. Are there any questions for staff on this or the applicant requesting the easement? Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing and ask if there's anyone here that wants to testify regarding this item. Okay, seeing no response, I'll close the public hearing and turn to the council for action.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move to approve EAS FY 2025-0004, a request to vacate ingress and egress easements.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll the call. Roll the call. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Thank you. Please go tell Jan this is done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Item G2, this is a third reading of ordinance 1055-25. This is our Title VI that we've been working through the three-reading process. Are there any questions since our last meeting?
Mr. Mayor, can I just put something on the record real quick on this one?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, I have a memo on this on page 71 of your packet, and then the ordinance is on page 76 of your packet. There were some minor changes, is what I wanted to let you know. They are de minimis, they're minor. They came from our environmental manager, James Pavlek, so they were mostly clerical. So there are some changes, nothing I think warrants any discussion unless you'd like me to answer questions specifically. But again, this was not a material change from the first two readings. It was just to clean up some, I'd call them clerical issues. So thank you.
Okay, any questions of council? Okay, hearing none, what's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
hearing that changes were de minimis and grammatical or clerical in nature, I would move for the third reading by title only of ordinance 1055-25.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Third reading, ordinance 1055-25, an ordinance of the City of Garden City, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending Garden City Code Title 6, Water and Sewer, Chapter 2, Municipal Water System, Chapter 3, Municipal Sewer Collection System, Chapter 5, Cross Connection, Chapter 6, Industrial Pretreatment, repealing Section 8, Special Agreements by simplifying language, removing redundant or unnecessary language, and amending language to change some violations to infraction offenses, providing severability, repealing conflicting city code provisions, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Item G3 is a motion to adopt and publish ordinance 1055-25.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I so move.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the clerk call the roll?
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. Item G4, Resolution 1205-25, approving a private citizen donation, authorizing the mayor to accept the donation on behalf of the city and providing an effective date.
Mr. Mayor, can I say a word on that one as well?
You may.
All right, Mayor, members of the council, I do have a memorandum on this one as well. It's on page 95 of your packet, followed by a proposed resolution that's on page 97 of your packet. A member of the citizenry is going to make a charitable donation to the Garden City Police Department to basically cover the price of 2 new motorcycles, patrol motorcycles, which is a great, generous donation to us. My memo and the resolution is drafted to make sure it's specific that these funds, the city can accept charitable donations. It's got to be for a public purpose, which this is. There needs to be protections to make sure it's used for that limited purpose, which is to buy 2 new police motorcycles for traffic enforcement and police enforcement. And so this is a legal way to do this, and I would recommend that Resolution 1205-25 be passed and adopted. Thank you.
Okay, any questions of council? Okay, hearing none. It's a pleasure of the council.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we approve Resolution 1205-25, which is that resolution approving a private citizen donation.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
this is a difficult decision, and I recognize that other members of the council would maybe or likely come to a different conclusion. I want to make it clear that I don't question the motives behind the donation or believe anyone here intends to be influenced by it. A donation of this magnitude certainly presents tremendous opportunity to increase public safety in Garden City. I also understand the proposed donation is legal. The responsibility of this council is not only to govern fairly, but to be perceived as governing fairly. When a substantial donor has ownership interests in projects that come before the council, we must be exceedingly careful. I took the same approach when accepting or rejecting campaign donations. Even the unintended appearance that financial contributions might influence decision-making could damage the public confidence in our neutrality. For that reason, I will be voting no, not because I doubt the merits of the gift, but because I want to maintain the highest possible standard of public trust in our land use and processes and policy making.
Okay, thank you.
President of the council, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
are you aware of who the personal donor is?
Yes.
Other members of the council, are you aware of who the personal donor is?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Would you like to know, council member?
No, I don't, because for that reason, without the knowledge of who is contributing, I feel very comfortable accepting.
Okay,
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
yes.
I'm comfortable accepting too, just because I think when, even if this person had an application in front of the city, I think the council does a really good job of making sure that what we are deciding on is based on our code, and especially now that there's even a renewed focus on objectivity and reason statements and all those things. I think that the donation wouldn't impact our judgment, based on, you know, them having contributed motorcycles to the city.
Okay, anything further? Okay, it's a pleasure of the council.
So I would move that we approve Resolution 1205-25, which is a resolution approving a private citizen donation and authorizing the mayor to accept the donation on behalf of the city.
I'd second that motion.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, clerk, call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Page?
No.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. We have no unfinished business. We'll move down to new business, work session to discuss parking issues in the east end of Garden City on 42nd and 43rd. I've asked the chief to come up. I think I'm going to open this discussion by asking Councilmember Jorgensen to open the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
As Mr. Mayor, members of the council, chief, and those in attendance, I will remind you that for those of you that haven't been on council and haven't been attending and listening to the meetings for the past several years, there's been many, many applications come before this council in which there's been a lot of conversation around the parking, around our code that allows parking, and certainly I think it's a very, very consistent comment from the public when they provide comment on new applications concerning traffic, concerning parking, the congestion and safety around a lot of these new developments. And most recently, an application came before the council that is a development very close to the public charter school. And as a reminder, there's also another, not charter, it's another school in in close proximity. There's also been 3 developments in the same area, 42nd, 43rd. And as those developments have become occupied, the congestion on 42nd and 43rd is pretty significant. And I think that although, Chief, I'm not sure what you're prepared to speak to this evening, I believe 42nd and 43rd offer up a lot of safety concerns because of the presence of many children in the schools. And I would further remind everyone that we had requested the pedestrian crosswalk there be moved from 42nd to 43rd out of safety concerns. ACHD has accommodated that. We still have bus traffic school buses that go up and down 42nd and 43rd. What we've seen, what I personally have experienced and witnessed, is cars park on both sides of the street in the mornings. That narrows it down to very narrow passage where 2 cars cannot pass. So we have cars, pausing while other cars are trying to come north on 42nd. With all that, you have somebody open a door, you have a bus stop with the stop sign out, and children trying to board the school bus or, in the afternoon get off the school bus. And there's just become more and more, in my mind, safety concerns, but more frustration with the parking constraints and the safety issues that are being created. So with that new application, I would remind everyone that there was a conversation from the public saying, hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would you allow more development when there's already congestion around the school? Over time, I'm sorry.
No, you go right ahead.
Over time, as a reminder, with Chief Allen, so Chief Staumbaugh, prior to Chief Staumbaugh's role, we had discussed many different options that have been, casually brought up. We've casually talked about, meters. We've casually talked about restricting, parking to one side of the street. We've talked about other alternate solutions to this on-street parking challenge that we've had. And I believe, and I'm sure Chief and Mayor will provide some of the background, but to the best of my recollection, we pretty much dismissed metering. We don't have the resources to patrol or enforce any kind of metered type parking solution. And so that may be an option, it may not, but that is the background and the precipice of why I asked for a working session to more fully discuss what options there are. And although I think that the jettison came from the 42nd, 43rd, I do believe that there are other parts of the city also being impacted, 33rd, 34th, 35th, possibly Coffee. You know, we've had public testimony very concerned about the developments off of Marigold. So with that, Mayor, that is the reason that I requested a work session to discuss options.
Thank you. That's a great introduction. The chief has some information he can share with us, so Chief, why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, I appreciate it. Just to follow up a little bit on Councilmember Jorgensen, this kind of did the start at 42nd and 43rd with the schools, particularly on 42nd. People who were trying to leave the Boys and Girls Club Fishers or any of the businesses or houses traveling south from the river toward Adams to try to make a left out of there during certain hours is impossible, and so that backs up traffic for people who want to turn right. So ACHD did agree, and there's a sign there that says from 3 to 4 you're not allowed to make left-hand turns, and we do try to go enforce that as often as we can. It just depends on staffing. The pedestrian crossing did get moved. That was a huge, to me that was two benefits for that. One, it was a safety issue. It's way too close to VMP, and it was a knee-jerk reaction to one crash that happened where a little girl got hurt, and I'm not minimizing that, but that's why that got put in. It's way more effective on 43rd, and Answer and Future both have, Future's on 43rd, and Answer goes both 42nd and 43rd. So with the kids that travel from Answer to the Boys and Girls Club, it's just a safer route. It's further away from the VMP 41st, 40th, 42nd area. That's a whole engineering nightmare in itself. It's it needs to be expanded from an engineering standpoint. We need right-hand turn lane. That's way out of this, but that's one of the issues we're going to have there until that can be fixed in an engineering standpoint. It's going to be hard. It's like trying to do something on Glenwood unless they expand the bridge or put another bridge in. There's really nothing we can do. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Chief, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just had a quick question. Since you did bring up our engineering there, what is the status of our infrastructure on those two streets? Are there sidewalks on both sides, and how wide is the street? Is it ACHD standards? Do we know? So I'm just curious, what's there now?
When I first started, Adams didn't have sidewalks.
Okay.
So now it has sidewalks on both sides, a center turn lane and a travel lane on each side. Part of the problem is at VMP, if you're going east on Adams to make a right onto VMP, there's no right-hand turn lane, so traffic backs up there pretty substantially. Where if you're going west on Adams and you want to make a right to go north on VMP, there's a right-hand turn lane. Yeah. So that flows quite a bit better. I think from the talks that the mayor and I had when we were talking with ACHD about moving that signal, because they didn't want to do that, but they moved it up thanks to the council and the mayor. They don't have the right of way at that corner. That would be an eminent domain, or there's an electric stop there that the person just doesn't want to get rid of the property because it probably knows what the property is. So, yeah.
And answer that question.
Yeah,
Mayor,
come on up, Jenna, where we can
the council. Sorry to jump in the presentation, but I do happen to know the numbers off the top of my head for the configurations of 42nd and 43rd. They do meet ACHD width and overall design standards. I'll say that with a bit of a caveat. They're both 50-foot right-of-ways with the 5-foot sidewalks on either side, and then the parking and the lanes. And right now, I do want to let Mayor and Council know or remind you that ACHD is looking at 43rd. But right now they don't anticipate under the program. They're looking at 43rd to design 43rd. Any improvements except for infilling where sidewalk doesn't exist.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Director Thornwell.
And that's a
Chief,
concern
sorry to
for me.
interrupt.
That actually is a concern for me, because the programs that ACHD is looking at, they want to improve streets on the south side of Shindon that don't need improvement. There's nothing there right now. We don't have sidewalks on 37th. We don't, where people already are, to do something on West 38th doesn't make any sense. It doesn't connect to the Greenbelt. There's no way for it to connect to the Greenbelt. There's a canal bank, so that's a whole nother issue. But why are we talking about parking? As the council member Jorgensen said, it's at most public hearings when there's development, parking's an issue. Well, you all know we're redeveloping. Most of our streets are narrow, and I have some pictures here for you. And well, it meets their standards. Their standards are not adequate, because when you have parking on 42nd and 43rd and there's large vehicles there, 2 large vehicles cannot pass. And as a matter of fact, one of our staff members a couple years ago, trying to navigate that in a pickup, clipped a mirror. There's just not enough space to have parking on both sides of the street. Now, that being said, what happens on 42nd and 43rd may not be what may be applicable in this area versus the waterfront district, so versus around the fairgrounds. So it's just, so this is on 3900 block of Reed. Looking back past my car toward the boardwalk, that's 40th. This is one of the new, to my left, where the white pickup's parked, is one of the new skinny houses or townhouses subdivisions. So that pickup is parked there. That's my car. Between my car and the very edge of the road is about 8.5 feet. So if I had my full-size pickup, I have a 1-ton personal, there's no way that I could get around that there. So and these are just examples just to not show it's not just 42nd and 43rd. So this is 43rd, to where Councilmember Jorgensen was talking about. Future's over to my left. Now, there is a little bit different right now where so the development you guys just approved is basically to my right and down about 50 feet. Where that semi is, there's townhouses that are being built in there, so there's construction going on there, so that semi might not necessarily always be there, but narrow enough where this lady paused. The lady was approaching me because she didn't want to try to pass. If I was going to go, she didn't want to go, but I stopped, and I was stopped when I took the picture. So this is 400 block East 42nd, going toward the Boys and Girls Club from Adams. A van, again, same thing. He sees me, slows down and stops to figure out what I'm going to do. It's narrow, and especially when there's a school bus there, because the school buses do go down the street and they stop, even without the stop sign out. A full-size pickup, they can't pass. And so, this is the same place with just a car. Same thing with the little small car. The driver of that vehicle did the same thing. Slow down and see what I did, because it gets congested. There's cars parked on both sides, and then there's the bump outs for the sidewalks.
Chief, is the construction on 42nd between Adams and the Boys and Girls Clubs complete now?
Correct.
Unless that one that...
Unless the Fisher's lot gets
Yes, sir.
developed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we have no way of knowing whether those cars are parked on the street or or overflow for the apartments or people.
So I did ask staff, and I actually drove through Trailwinds one morning, and granted people could be at work, but there were when I drove through Trailwinds, there were 37 empty parking spaces, but all the parking on the street was full. And asking staff at night, the parking lot's not always full, the street is. Some of that is convenience for the residents. They live closer to the river, so they want to park there rather than have to walk through the parking lot.
Okay.
This is on 40th. If you turn off Adams going toward Reed, I'm not a photographer, so I apologize. But where the pickup is, and from here, for me, driving in my city-issued vehicle, if a full-size pickup or an even bigger vehicle came by, I would have slowed down or stopped to let it by. The streets are a lot of the streets are just way narrow. Sawyer, this is the same thing. So this is a garbage truck going down Sawyer this afternoon. There's no way I can get by, anyone can get by. And he's not going to want to necessarily go any further over to his right, because you would get too close to the parked cars on his right-hand side. This is an area, parking area, I have a concern that's a little bit different than the residential area, that when the soccer fields are built out and they are having soccer tournaments during the week, that's gonna be a problem. Because unless, again, I'll reiterate, unless the fairgrounds, when they design it, the way you have to walk through, no matter what field you're using, you have to come through from the west side through the grandstands or whatever, people will park as close as they can get right away, just like they do for the fair now. So that causes me some concern. So this is, Councilmember Jorgensen was talking about coffee. This is courtesy, if I can get it over here, of Suzanne. So this is looking at Susanna. So the Coffee Village townhomes that are behind the memory care center there, they're starting to park south of their driveway going toward Willowbrook. It's causing issues. And so Susanna and the mayor, I think, were out one day and took a couple videos to out. This is our concern. So you'll watch, they're gonna, this van's gonna cross the center line because of those cars that are parked there. One major concern that the mayor has brought up is in the winter, when ITD has their big dump trucks out with the plows on the front of them, that makes them extra wide. So that can be an issue. I have in the past, here's two cars, or a car and a pickup that do the same thing. I have asked ACHD to post no parking signs south of that driveway, and I initially got turned down, so I'm trying again. But again, both those cars cross the center turn lane, and there's oncoming traffic coming northbound.
I think we'll have an opportunity to do something there. I've had a discussion with the ACHD director head, and I've got some, Suzanne and I are creating a graphic that I'll be visiting with the chief about.
So solutions, as I've learned watching Jenna, much like zoning, there's different parts of the city have different needs. What might, what could work great in one place might not work in another. Some of the possibilities, eliminate parking on one side of the street. We have broached that subject with ACHD on 42nd. And I did meet with the lady who owns Grassmilk Produce to find out from her which side would be more beneficial for them. They've been there a long time. I mean, I just don't want to go in and say, hey, we're going to eliminate parking on this side when it would actually be safer to do it on the other side. So I think whatever we do what Chief Allen did when we talked about 42nd and 43rd, and we identify that area and the people that are affected by it. We reach out to them. It wasn't a public hearing. It was a meeting at the police department to get public input to see what solutions they would like to see. This did work at 50th and Shinden by Moxie Java. So you're driving westbound on Shinden and you make the turn on 50th to go to the police station. There used to be parking. You used to be able to park on the east side of 50th in front of Moxie there. And then one day I came around the corner and there was a person parked all the way, like 5 feet from Shinden. Part of that problem is the landlords that own that building now eliminated a bunch of the parking for customers so that they could park there. So people are forced to park out on the street. So ACHD did remove parking on the east side of 50th from Moxie to Bradley. That's improved the safety because now you're not coming around the corner and almost hitting a car. So they do work. It does work doing that. Maybe look at residential parking permits, business parking permits, especially around the fairgrounds when they start, when that kicks in. And I don't know about the cost of installing them. I don't want to have a Caldwell thing happen with parking meters. There's other technologies there that the mayor's mentioned. ACHD, I don't think, has allowed Boise to do it, to put the sensors in the ground, where then it's an app. So you don't have to have the meter, and you don't have to have people going around collecting money and that sort of thing. So those are just some solutions, but I think.
Excuse the interruption, Chief.
Yeah.
What occurred at Caldwell, or is that what you're describing?
So Boise a few years ago wanted to put sensors into the parking spaces, actually in the pavement, and then ACHG didn't allow it at the time. They wanted to get rid of the parking meters, and the sensors would basically allow you to, it would know how long that car was there, and if it was overextended, and there would be an app associated with it. So in Caldwell, what happened last year is they put parking in the meters downtown to try to turn over businesses, but they didn't really talk to the businesses, from what I'm reading online. They put them in, a business went down because people were not coming down there to park. And so they canceled the contract, and it cost them $167,000. So it just wasn't a smooth implementation. So I don't think it's just as easy as going and, hey, we're going to put parking meters in. Because the mayor and Councilmember Jorgensen are right. There is a cost associated with enforcing those. And like Lisa's not going to like to hear this, but in Boise, it's the city clerk's office that is in charge of parking. So there are people on the bicycles and cars actually report, they work for the city clerk. So.
I don't want a bicycle.
So those are just, we made a little bit of headway down at 42nd and 43rd, but more needs to be done. And citywide, and I don't know what that looks like as legally as from code or, and I don't know from a building standpoint, one of the rumors that I had heard about here at the Coffee Townhomes, one of those townhomes is occupied, I think, under contract with probation and parole, and they've told their parolees and probationers they're not allowed to park in the parking lot. I have not vetted that out yet, but two of their offenders that our guys have stopped and arrested have mentioned that. So, and they also use them for when like TDS came in and they had their crews that come in from out of state with their big pickups, and there was quite a few of them that stayed there as well. And so now on the side of the road you have some big F-350s, some dualies, and that even encroaches more into what really should be a travel lane. So,
Mr. Mayor, can I add something?
yeah, please.
The only thing I wanted to add, Mayor, members of the council, is that Ms. Thornborough and the council had enough foresight a couple of years ago to add a chapter to Title V to deal specifically with parking permits. So parking permits is already baked in our code, if that's a direction that the mayor and council wanted to go. Thank you.
Great.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Question for the chief.
Sure.
Thank you, Chief. In your experience with law enforcement, and just a preamble for that, is some people might know that Chief worked for a larger jurisdiction in between working for Garden City and then coming back to Garden City. In your experience with residential permits in cities that have those, it's my understanding that people will park where it's convenient, and even if they don't have the permit, in hopes that there's no enforcement while they're there running a 15-20 minute errand or whatever. And then even if they are cited or ticketed, that's something that they pay down the road. I mean, so really the solution doesn't free a parking spot for a resident.
No, sir. Like, I can't speak to the area specifically in my mind for residential parking is around Boise High, because again, that goes back to the clerk's office, so we didn't deal a lot with that at BPD. Carrington College, at the end of Liberty, there's apartment complexes, and there was no parking allowed there, and I cited a bunch of people there. But it didn't, you're right, it didn't free up the spot, it just gave them a ticket for, I don't remember what the cost was, and so,
Right.
But I could go there almost every day for the first 2 or 3 days, and then the parking, they would not park there for a while.
Oh, okay.
And then maybe a new group of people would come in and like, oh, I'm gonna try, it's a new class, and we're gonna try it and have to ticket them as well.
Mr. Mayor, Chief, so why and how did ACHD bite on 50th where Moxie is, and it seems to be a challenge to get them to respond to other roads and areas?
So we have a liaison that's worked for ACHD for a lot of years, and for smaller things like that, he has the authority, and if it's a safety issue and we can prove it's a safety issue, he can make that decision and go forward. I think for larger issues such as completely eliminating parking on one side of the street, I think he has a boss who has a boss, and they're gonna get some feedback from their bosses, and that needs to go a little bit higher. Like for example, on coffee, I reached out and he had to take that to the next level, and it was the next level that said no.
Mr. Mayor, I do think, and I recall Chief Allen hosting a community conversation, I would say, and I think there's a lot of value there. And I think that that might be a reasonable next step to revisit with, certainly on 42nd and 43rd, business owners and potentially property owners, to get, you know, an updated feedback, updated concerns and observations. That might be a reasonable next step for the 42nd and 43rd area. But I'm also interested to hear, you made a comment about coffee and what the progress you've had with ACHD.
Well, on coffee, I'll be presenting on another proposal. I haven't shown it to the chief yet. That would help by eliminating some of that parking. As you go south on coffee past the entrance into the townhomes area, if you look down, if you stand in the middle of the road carefully and look south, you'll see the double yellow line. You'll see it actually bend to the west, and that's where the line really narrows, or the lane really narrows. And if there is any parking that remains there, it's going to be limited to very few cars, because they end up moving further and further south, which exacerbates the issue. And then coming out of the townhouses there, you have to get out into the travel lane to look south to see if somebody's coming. So I had a discussion when when we were up in Sun Valley, I had a discussion with Director Ryan Head, and I think he's going to be amenable to something there. So I've got it. So I think we'll get some relief there. Whether it's everything we want or not, I don't know, but I think we'll make some headway there. But before I do that, in fact, Susanna just gave me a draft little map today. I need to make a couple of adjustments on that. I'll share it with the chief, and he'll give me the stink eye, or, well, if we can get that, that'd be better. So we'll see how that works out. But generally, and this, if you remember when we updated the traffic or the parking code, we had everything from don't require any parking and let the market determine that, and, you know, if people can't park, they won't rent the apartments, and it'll all fix itself. From that side of the spectrum to increasing our required parking, which would have potentially some effect on the development down there. And we tried to come up with a reasonable balance based on number of parking spaces per unit. We considered spaces for small vehicles versus big vehicles, and we kind of beat that to death, if you can remember. And I'm not sure any of us were under an illusion that we had a perfect scenario that would balance the private property rights of those that are developing property under our city code, and the negative impact on those that are there and those that will be there. So I think an example of an approval that complied with our code assumes that people are going to park in their garage in some instances. And a lot of neighborhoods that, you know, the garage is a storage unit. So
So it sounds like, short of revisiting our code and coming up with a different formula, which we did 2 years ago, we're literally at the mercy of ACHD and ITD on whether they will approve something. We can always come up with
Yeah,
ideas for them and things like that, but it's kind of their jurisdiction, so they can approve or deny what we want. So there's nothing. I mean, I
yeah,
guess-
that's really true with ITD particularly. ACHD, technically, it's true. And I just think we've got to keep pushing it uphill on some of these issues. But I think deciding what the right thing to do is, deciding whether we need to rethink the formula, deciding whether or not we've got people parking on 42nd Street that should be parking in the Trailwinds parking lot. You know, we got to think about some of those things a little bit. Eliminating parking on one side, that I'm not afraid to address that. That would force a reaction, and maybe we'd find out really whether or not people that live in Trailwinds are parking on the street. They'd be forced to park in the parking lot. There should be adequate parking on the west side of the street for all the townhomes that are there. That was the idea, and you actually drive in and the parking's interior in there.
You got all those storage units now.
But if you're facing right out onto the 42nd Street and you can walk 20 feet and get in your car, maybe that's, so some of that may just be forcing the issue, and I think the chief's come up with something that we can think about and maybe take it a step at a time instead of trying to.
Is there
Do
an
all
option
those
to have maybe instead of closing, I mean, this question for Chief, what would happen if you had time limits during the day? You know, kind of like, you have 1 hour parking, right? And or is that still like, people just move their cars or, but I didn't know if that would be an alternative. And if ACHD won't let us clear a side of the street, will they let us put time limits on, let's have a 1 hour parking minimum, and then people will probably move their cars into the parking lot if that's where they live. I didn't know if that's been thought of.
Mayor and Councilmember Jacobs, I'm not sure. So I just think, and again, going back to like BPD, the clerks dealt with all that downtown. Me personally, I don't go downtown because of that reason. I'd rather go out to the village because I don't have to pay for parking, and I can stay there as long as I want. So
We got to be careful we don't do
Don't have
things
an answer.
that we can't enforce.
Yeah, I just
And
remember
that's-
I had a business on, what was my business? On Grove Street, and they would always park right in front of it was Grove and 15th, and at Alloy Lighting when I owned that, and they would park on the street every time, and people would work at Idaho Power, they park there, go to work all day long, come back, they put a 2 hour minimum on that whole street, and there's parking spots there now a lot more, just because people are finding
Yeah,
out where else
yeah.
to park. So
Well-
that's what brought it to mind.
There's a couple things we can do. I'm not opposed to having a neighborhood meeting, although I can tell you what they're going to say. A lot of them. There's going to be complaints that we either didn't approve enough or require enough parking, or it's inconvenient, or I bought the place thinking I could park on the street and now you're going to take it away from me. So those are the balls we got to juggle. Might be worth, when I talked to Director Head about the Coffee Street, it might be worth kicking some of these ideas around with him and seeing what might work, because if something doesn't change, nothing's going to change. So 42nd and 43rd are really uncomfortable to drive down if there's opposing traffic. There's no question about that. Traffic engineers will say, well, that's traffic calming. It keeps everybody going slow. And and you're right. May be good for Prius sales, I don't know. But anyway,
Mr. Mayor, I think.
help us out here, Jenna.
Mayor, members of the council.
We need to be rescued, Jenna.
I believe that through your discussions and with, also with the chief's discussions, some of this did come up, but I did want to note that the council did submit the 5-year work plan requests, and the intersection at Coffee and Marigold was one of the top 3 priorities, and so it is my understanding, based on what their staff said, that that should filter up next year to be looked at a little bit more formally than an immediate fix. And certainly you've explored why removing parking is an issue. I've also asked staff to explore the possibility to remove parking on one side, and without it going a little bit higher, that's a no-go at a staff level, from my understanding.
Right, yeah, I'm sure it is, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, can I add one more thing about
Sure,
that?
absolutely.
So we have a thing called the stealth stat. It looks like a cable box that we put on poles, and it measures speed coming, both approaching and leaving, and no one knows it's there, so it doesn't change their behavior. So between April 30th and May 10th, 32,000 cars down Coffee. 9,000 going southbound, 9,200 roughly, I don't have the exact numbers, and 22,000 coming northbound. So that shocked me. And
Yeah,
the speeds
that's
were,
eye-opening.
It's a lot of cars.
yeah, so we're gonna do some more enforcement out there. Their speeds were a little higher than they should be. But yeah, I was shocked at that,
Right.
the number of cars. And then, you know, coming in today, you know, the lights were screwed up somehow, so Coffee was backed up past Marigold because it wasn't allowing, I'm sorry, Marigold was backed up past Coffee because it wasn't allowing that to turn.
Usually it's only backed up to the post office.
Yeah, it was pretty, anyway, I apologize, but I just thought those numbers popped into my head.
Oh, great. Well, is it all right with the council if I just maybe try and get a meeting with Director Head, kind of bounce some of this stuff off and see what we think our latitude is from the engineering perspective, and then the next step would be having a discussion with Commissioners Pickering and Gold because they represent Garden City on the ACSD Commission.
Mr. Mayor, before we come to a conclusion of this work session, I would like to make a couple comments. And I don't want my comments to be perceived as my opinions or this is what we should do. These are just comments. My first year with the council, I was assigned to a committee that put me in a position to liaise with representatives of our public transit agency. And I had some great questions. I thought, I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in Milwaukee, I've lived in a lot of cities where public transit's used, right? People rely on it, it's a tool. And so I spoke with this casually, outside of a public hearing with this representative. And, why isn't public transit being used? That's my question. And the answer, which apparently has been studied in major studies, is that there's what this person called a pain point. And the pain point idea is when it becomes so painful to take your car into an area, people look, that's only when they will look to using public transit, because cars are convenient. We all like our cars. I love riding in my car, right? I mean, it literally has to be painful. That could be financially painful. That could be convenience factor. And it's not lost on me that there's a chicken and egg problem with the availability of public transit and those who use it. Moreover, I want to point out that discussion doesn't contemplate things like safety, right? I mean, there's no change to safety, right? It's just it's a change of parking availability. Finally, my comment about if we're talking about 42nd, 43rd, public transit's a great tool for commuters, but for residents, it's you're gonna have your car at your residence. That's pretty much, yeah, maybe there's exceptions to that, but, so I do just wanna make a record of that and have that be in the back of our mind that eventually, it won't be in my lifetime, public transit will be a reality here because it has to be.
I think the challenge is you have to have multiple pain points in different parts of the city and then have a bus stop at each one of those pain points, but if you only have one, you can't build out a system, right? And I think to your point, it'll be years before we have pain points all over the valley, then it's like, okay, now we can put a bus stop in every pain point.
And I feel like that's the guiding hand of the
That's
market.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And-
Good observation.
Yeah, and just for clarity, there is a bus stop, right, at Adams and VMP. It's either 50 feet before Adams or 50 feet after. But there's a bus stop that's pretty proximate. I never see anyone there getting on or off.
That's
Further
all
clarity.
residents do point.
Okay, Lisa, will you record a note to yourself to remind the mayor to get with Ryan and just, they've got a stable of traffic engineers. So I think I'd like to understand the rationale behind the decisions they make regarding parking on the street. So that might learn something.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Sorry to do this.
No.
Do we have any counts of vehicles through the Adams VMP intersection?
I don't off the top of my head, no ma'am, but I can check with ACHD and see if they have them.
That would be very interesting because I think part of you identified part of the pain point there is with no right-hand turn there, it does become very congested and people start doing stupid things.
Yeah. Well, I've gotten caught down there before.
Up to the gas station.
So,
And if not, we can throw the stealth down.
yeah. If you drive down there, make sure you understand the UPS departure times, because those get jammed up. Okay, so you get a report back. I'll try to be sensitive
Chief,
to that.
one second,
Oh,
actually,
sure.
one more question.
Sorry about that.
I'd like to talk for a minute about citations. So imagine for a minute that we implement permits or meters or whatever we decide to implement, and you dedicate a staff to high traffic areas that, one or two streets in the city, or dedicated staff. Assuming violations are routine, how does the fine structure go? Does that come to the police department, or could that be allocated as such, and would that ever pay for staff?
I may have to, I'm sorry, Mayor, Council President Page. When we issue parking citations, it's under the city code, and those come straight to the clerk's office. And any monies get deposited, I believe, just into the general fund to be reallocated. They don't necessarily go to, and I may also, if Mr. Wadham's like, if they fight it, I don't know if it can go to court. I'm sorry, I've never been on a parking ticket to court, so.
Mayor, Council President, I can speak to that. So I am lucky enough to prosecute parking tickets from time to time when people contest them. Sometimes it blows up into like an hour hearing with a judge. They are infractions typically, so that's a court trial and not a jury trial, thankfully, and they don't have a right to a public defender because it's an infraction. The problem is finding the people. We have several that are just sitting on the wall because we can't serve them the papers. So what happens is they get a parking ticket on their windshield, and if they just say they didn't get the parking ticket, or they say it was registered to my daughter, or they just say to the city, I'm not going to pay you and you can try to come after me if you want to, then we try to go after them and we can't find them because people move around, people sell the vehicle, buy a new vehicle, and so it's relatively easy to write the parking ticket. It's a lot harder to get the money, and then the laws on collections is We send things to collections if somebody's not paying their utility bill, if somebody's not paying a parking ticket, for example. But to send it to collections, we first have to establish that that individual was served that ticket. And so we have process servers that are sometimes looking for people over a $50 ticket. That doesn't really pencil. And so tickets are written, but nothing ever happens to them more times than not.
Too bad there's not a connection to DMV, right? Next time they go to register their license, it's like, oh, you have some outstanding tickets with Garden City that you need to pay.
And it used to be, council member, that on some infractions, if you didn't pay them, they would eventually suspend your driver's license. That's not happening anymore. That was a legislative change for this category of infractions. So if somebody doesn't, we transfer it to court and they don't pay it, nothing happens. Their driver's license doesn't get suspended, nothing like that. So.
Let's not make a public record of that.
Oh, they know.
Everybody, and they all know. That's the thing. Everybody knows. So, thank you.
Sorry I didn't have better answers, sir.
No, that's okay, and thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, well, we'll just, I don't know what to advise other than let me see if I can get some information and come back. One other thing, since Lisa's taking notes so I don't forget. We can contact the management at Trailwinds, for example, and ask them what their policy is regarding the tenant parking. We can also contact the townhomes on the other side of the street. We'll have an association of some kind, and see if they have a protocol for whether or not you park out on the street or not. So, might get some information, I don't know. I can get Susanna to kind of track that stuff down. So, okay, let's go to item I2. This is to continue our discussion on what we're calling the buffer ordinance 1050-24. We're going to stay after this thing till something positive happens, so I don't know what else to tell you. After the last council meeting, Jenna and Charlie and I sat down and came up with some recommendations that, at least from our perspective, which may or may not be correct, we dealt with or captured the discussion we had at the last meeting, particularly regarding the RM zoning designation and whether that should be, we should have a comprehensive single piece of legislation to try and deal with different zone and density and building heights and segregating R3 from something else, and having buffering criteria so that if you have a new use adjacent to an old use and the new use is, how do you buffer the impact of the new use if it is tall, for example, or close or whatever. So I'm going to have Jenna kind of go through, I don't know if you had time to read all 280, whatever it is, pages, but there's some areas we've highlighted, and if you'll allow me, I'm going to have her go through about a half a dozen of the topics that were addressed in the packet. And then we can go back and answer some questions. So Jenna.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council. Just to start and to give everyone bearings, I'd like to give an overview of how to read the materials unfortunately after the fact, in that I know that you've all read them already. But on page 108, of the packet is the memorandum from my memorandum. And there's a side-by-side clean version of what's currently in code, and that's on the left-hand side in blue, and what's proposed, and that's on the right-hand side in black. On page 167 is the ordinance that we've been working with everything included. But to separate what would be a new zoning district from the quote-unquote buffer ordinance itself, anything that would be stricken out related to just the RM zoning district is highlighted in green. And then there are changes from the last time that we met, in the last version that you saw, that are highlighted in yellow. Those include Mr. Bob Taunton's comments and how staff's addressed them. Staff has also met with Dennis Fix. I believe he's the owner of Far West Garden and Landscaping. Hopefully I said that correctly. And the city's also received comments from Cass Jones with Idaho Department of Water Resources. Staff also reached out to Stack Rock and Bryn, which is Boise River Enhancement Network. That's a group of individuals that come together to oversee the river. And on the onset of this, they were in support of this ordinance, and I wanted to make sure that some of the suggested changes they were still in support of. But we have not heard back from them as of yet, but I do anticipate that we will hear back, hopefully prior to the hearing in 2 weeks. And then there's another ordinance on page 222 that would be the standalone ordinance to adopt a new zoning district, that RM zoning residential medium density. However, there's a lot of overlap between the two, and so I've just stricken everything in gray where there's overlap. So as changes are made, the correct wording and the correct changes will be reflected in both ordinances. On page 240, we have Mr. Bob Taunton's with Taunton Group's comments, and there are also responses from, I've responded to those. In some instances, what was needed was just some clarification of language, and so it may not have been clear, so those comments were great. Most of his suggestions were implemented, and then there are some that, one in particular, I have a question for Bryn on, and that's the removal of the floodway from the river zone definition. They also include IDWR's comments, as well as the discussion that I had with Mr. Fix. To go through the changes that you see highlighted in yellow, the first is, this has been a working product, and the intent for the purpose statements for the zoning districts was really just to point back to which comp plan designation as this has evolved. There were two that still had references to the table of uses, and that compatible uses being identified in 82B2, and that was just removed, so it just points back to the comp plan designation. Mr. Taunton had suggested removing the maximum lot coverage. Staff agreed that that could be something that certainly council could consider without affecting too many things. I can tell you in my 20 years here, I rarely see having to calculate the maximum coverage. He also had recommended removal of the minimum lot size. I think that would be just fine. There's one exception to that, and staff does not recommend removing that from the R1A, the large one lot size lots zoning designation, and because that would change how those function and interact. And then I'm not going to go into some of the just language clarifications that were changed. But he did note that a side and rear setback adjacent to the green belt of 30 feet could be a large setback. Staff has taken that down to the same setback of 15 feet that the front is, but clarified that it can be up to 30 feet to accommodate adopted designs for flood mitigation measures, such as levees, flood walls, et cetera. We do need to contemplate, as a city, should you move forward with looking at the Army Corps study that's in right now. They do, their plan right now would say up to 30 feet would be the minimum depending on the measure. And so should the city adopt those, that's when those additional setbacks would kick in. Otherwise, it would be a 15-foot setback. Fences and retaining walls. There was a lot of clarification done. You'll see a lot of yellow in that section. The intent really wasn't to try to change what the standards would be, just clarify and reorganize. The one exception to that is, as it was drafted the last time you saw it, retaining walls could be up to 6 feet. Mr. Taunton had noted that that's not typical. Usually they're more along the lines of 4 feet. And so this is capped at 3.5 feet to stay consistent with fence sizes. And so you'd have a series of retaining walls if you needed more height than that. And then reaching out on the landscaping, there was some concern that 50% coverage was onerous. And Mr. Fix was helpful in reviewing that. An example of what that would mean on a 60-foot wide lot, which is pretty small. A standard lot on the east end of town is 100-foot wide. You would need 2 trees to achieve that. If you have a side lot, it might get tight, and so there's a caveat that's been drafted in that if precluded by easement or impossible because of a structure, that you wouldn't have to add that. And there's some language that was repetitive. It was talking about how many lineal feet and how many trees and what type of class, and then also the overall canopy coverage. And he had suggested, agreeing that shade on the green belt is important, and softening the structures adjacent to the green belt is important, and probably sussing out the percentage of canopy or vegetation would be a direction that he would suggest. And coming back and speaking to the other development staff, services staff members, they didn't like that percentage. It's really hard to get applicants. We currently have language like that in our code, and applicants never submit the percentage canopy coverage or percentage of vegetation that they have. And so they really do prefer the lineal feet, this type of class of tree, because it's much easier to get applicants to submit. And then much easier to review as well. And so for that reason, staff kept that language in lieu of the percentage language. And again, we're hoping to hear back from BREN, Boise River Enhancement Network, and particularly on that river zone definition and their thoughts on that. And then the IDWR comments, similar to Mr. Taunton's, to make sure not to forget about Idaho Department of Lands. And we had a definition for the ordinary high water mark, where the city would determine that. I can tell you it's hard for applicants to try to determine that because there's not a clearinghouse, but they had suggested, because Idaho Department of Lands and IDWR are the owners of the river, that they prefer that the definition notes that is as determined by them. And with that, are there any questions that we'd like to go through, any clarifications, comments?
Well, it's a lot to absorb. I, let me start by just asking, at the last meeting, the consensus seemed to be that dealing with the RM zoning designation to get that on the books so it could be used, and segregating that from the rest of it was the direction that we were so this does that. And our counselor, see, I started calling you counselor lately.
I suppose that's proper.
Yeah, yeah. Well, after 19 years, maybe I'll get something right here, but the memo made a distinction in the process between the buffering ordinance procedure and the more simple legislative function of creating a zoning designation without any impact on somebody's personal property unless it's used. So mixing those together, it seems to me segregating them was probably a good idea, whether we meant it to be or not. So are we good? Just to answer that particular question with segregating the RM
Yes.
from the rest of it?
I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I just say a couple things on the legal side before you get into
Sure,
it a little further?
sure.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I have an updated memo. I just want to touch a couple points that have come up since April 14th, briefly. First of all, I had the last April 14th city council meeting transcribed. That's on page 299 of your packet. I went back through there just to refresh my memory on exactly what my instructions were, and so I thought that was helpful for at least me. And then on my legal memorandum, starting on page 288, I talk about some things that have happened since April 14th, one of which, on April 14th, I think I heard that the council said that there was a material change. There was not a motion on that, and this is not noticed up as an action item tonight. So when this is noticed up as an action item next, I'm going to ask for a motion on whether there was a material change or not and the reasons for that. It is set for another public hearing. It's just, so that's already set up in the queue. For our written decision, I'm going to ask for a motion and a rationale next time this is set up for an action item. And then on page 289, I referenced the 5 things that the council instructed staff to do, which is 1, take RM zoning out, which has happened, and the mayor just spoke to that. Look at section 18, which is protecting the river amenity, and I'll mention that briefly. You now have Bob Taunton's comments, and then we're here to tackle this again today. I was getting a little confused between quasi-judicial and legislative and what is what, and so I tried to break that down for you. But before I talk to that, on page 290, there's an analysis of when should an ordinance be broken up. And I think the council is wise in breaking this up because it just, there's something called the single subject rule, which an ordinance should really only tackle one subject or one topic at a time. That's right in the Idaho Constitution. So when you start throwing a bunch of things into one ordinance, it gets, may violate the single subject rule. And so I wanted to mention that. Regarding section 18, the river amenity on page 291, I start talking about, look, this is an overlay district, so maybe we should just call it an overlay district. I have been critical of overlay districts in the past based on how they were enforced, and my main issue was people could pick whether they wanted the overlay or the base, but this is really an overlay district, and so my point on talking about this now is maybe you want to put it in the overlay district section instead of this kind of standalone section. That's for you all to decide. I just wanted to bring up the issue. I mean, it's basically, it is overlay district, and there was an overlay district for the river with a committee, and I understand, and I think, as I recall, because I sat in on those committee meetings along with Wendy Carver-Herbert, there was a lot of time spent on that overlay district, and that's really what this is. I think overlay district in this situation may make some sense. On page 292, I start talking about the written decision, and that needs to be beefed up. and it will be beefed up. Ms. Thornborough and I will beef it up, but any help we could have on rationale, so on and so forth, would be appreciated. 293, the question came up whether you could have a simultaneous adoption with a new zoning designation and a rezone at the same time. The answer is no. You could have them on the same agenda, but you have to amend your comp plan first and then do the rezone. And then on page 294, I start talking about what's legislative, what's quasi-judicial. I'll leave that for your review, but I break these down specifically for process. So on page 294, I put the due process requirements and the required findings for a new medium density zoning designation, so to make sure that we're all on the same page there. On page 296, I talk about how a rezone, a designation is legislative. An actual rezone, however, is quasi-judicial, and so I talk about that process starting on page 296. And then what we're talking about here, if you take out the medium density designation, what we're really talking about is citywide regulations regarding buffering, the river, fences, setbacks, maybe landscaping. And so I put the process that we have to follow on page 297, so we're all on the same page, and that is my legal review. Thank you.
And Mayor and Council, I have some follow-ups when you're ready for me.
Go ahead and follow up now.
Okay. So one, I'll go directly to what Mr. Wadhams had noted. We do have some what I consider to be overlays, or at least one still in code. The Boise River ordinance component that was drafted by and large by the committee that is before you in the buffer ordinance with some minor tweaks as we've gone through this process, was originally drafted to be in the overlay section, but at that point in time, direction was to not call things overlays anymore and to move them into the 8.4 standards. We also have moved our floodplain ordinance, which in my opinion is an overlay district as well, into the 8.4 standards, which are design standards. We can certainly move them back if that's your direction. Where they are they would be both mandatory, and so you could not pick and choose these ordinances. And then staff does have a question if you direct to move forward with segregating the new creation of the zoning district from the buffering ordinance. In creating that new district, it shifts what the other zoning districts are tied to in the comprehensive plan. And so fairly recently in the process, but previously reviewed by you, there was a suggestion to update the R3 uses, allowed uses and conditional uses. Would that stick with the RM ordinance? I think that would be fair, but staff segregated by what was kind of citywide and in place and strictly that RM new zone. Certainly we can work on the written decision. We'll make sure that it is ready for you for public hearing. But did want to note, in looking at those ordinances and separating them, staff did start to pull apart what the different desires were and having language that matches in the whereases. So hopefully that is addressed already.
Okay, I think I want you to kind of go back through that dissertation just a little bit, and there's a review component, so I want to make sure that the council has an opportunity to understand when you're reviewing this what makes sense, and we did have the overlay discussion, and we've done some overlays in the past that didn't seem to make sense, but we've got what are effectively overlays already, and this may be one, as our counselors indicated, may work in that one arena. So do you have a preference on whether things that are technically overlays in the buffering piece that we're looking at should be moved or not?
Mayor, I might be able to show you, and it might make more sense if I go directly to code. Code has, when the last major rewrite in 2008, code created a section for overlays, which is basically empty at this point in time. And so you can see it's chapter 3 of Title 8. And we've repealed the overlays within that, and they've been replaced into design and development regulations, which is chapter 4. It's nice and clean, and then there's a spot in code to put them back to overlay, to the overlays. It's certainly more work, and I think they function in chapter 4 as well, because they are regulations specific. And I don't know that you necessarily have to call them out as overlay. I've seen the floodplain ordinance all over different jurisdictions, ordinances where they place them, but at the end of the day, that's how it's functioning, and that's what it's doing, because you have the base zone as well as the standards that are attached to something fixed.
So would you rather have it in 8.4 or segregated?
In adopting it, much easier to adopt it in 8.4, and I think it's usable, but certainly where we have this 8.3, we could put it back there. A little bit more work, but I'm happy to do that if that's how the council directs. And a preference, I think it's the same language, so I don't have a preference.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wadhams,
Yes, sir.
if you could, I'm a little bit predisposed to not prefer overlays. I think it's basically by definition another layer, so it's kind of adds a cumbersome approach to this whole thing, I think. So I'm curious if you could add a little more color to why this might be appropriate in this case than, say, other cases.
Yes, I think, Mayor, Councilmember Rasmussen, I think just because really this is the Boise River, this is our primary amenity, I think that draws people to want to work here, live here, frequent here, and so I think really narrow just for the river. My recommendation would be to call it an overlay district. I'm not saying shift everything out of 4 back into overlay district. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying for our Boise River, it's our amenity, call it out what we're trying to do, which is an overlay district. And it's just shifting to a different chapter. It's not changing any wording.
I got you.
Yeah, so I'm not suggesting changing the wording. I'm just suggesting relocating where it goes.
So it's calling it out more effectively than, say, it otherwise would.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Rasmussen, because if you ask any of your legal research AI bots, you describe what this is, it all comes back and says, well, that's an overlay district.
Okay.
Why don't you just call it an overlay district?
Okay.
That's what you guys are discussing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Over, I guess I would just take it from an end user perspective. If you're a developer, what's easiest to understand to go into, I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. It's like, we want to make it simple for people to do business with us. The code is the code, right? Whether it's an overlay, what's easiest on the end user, whether it's in 4 or whether it's an overlay. That's how I would probably look at it.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, I would hope if you're an applicant, you flip through and make sure that you're addressing all sections of code. I think it might be slightly easier for an architect to go, oh, I need to address all of 8.4 and just go through the 8.4. I think your staff certainly would get them on track fairly easily. And so I think maybe just as a initial glance by those that are trying to work with the city, they might have a slightly better glance before they come to the city.
We just get a lot of experienced developers don't seem to have a problem with it. It's more the people who are first-time developers that
That would be correct.
they miss stuff, right? So it might be easier, what you're saying is just have it all in one spot and just like, okay, you just had to conform to 8.4 and you're good, right? So, all right, thank you.
But with that being said, hopefully they would go, yes, I'm adjacent to the river, yes, I'm adjacent to the floodplain if we move those back out. So.
There is a responsibility an applicant has, and hopefully newer applicants would have at least enough foresight to communicate with the staff that they're thinking about doing something, instead of just coming in cold turkey and dropping an application off. So anyway, I don't. So the content we're not having a discussion on, it's where it's located on that particular issue. Is that, am I getting that right? The content, okay. What was the next thing? I don't know that, unless the council wants to try and come to a consensus on that single topic, Council President, or whether we want to see what else we got on our plate as we kind of bounce through the rest of these things.
I feel as if it's probably important to come to a consensus on that,
Okay.
so that we're
Okay.
more prepared, properly prepared, before drafting. So, how does everybody feel?
To be honest, I'm kind of indifferent, right? It's the language per Charlie, or Mr. Williams, doesn't really change. That's why I asked that question, is just what's easiest on staff and what's easier on the applicant. If it's, I think, to the mayor's point, the applicant has some responsibilities to probably engage staff and things like that, then I would probably defer to what's easiest on staff to manage, because they're the ones that have to do it. But if all else being equal, I don't know if it really matters. If it's already there, why not leave it? But
And I heard testimony, or I don't know that it was testimony, from our director that all else isn't equal, work-wise, for staff loading.
Mayor, Council President Page, that's correct. Short term, we'd have to go through and just change all the numbering. And I'm assuming both the floodplain as well, if we're gonna take what truly is overlays and put them into the overlays. More long-term, we try to set up templates on our website with links, and so we have a lot of preset emails or staff reports, and so catching those links and getting them redirected for the floodplain ordinance. Certainly the river zone is a new ordinance, but the floodplain would take some broken links and finding those and scrubbing that. So there'd be a short-term and a long-term, but nothing that's out of the question of being able to do.
Teresa, add the word overlay to 8.4, throw that in.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, President of the Council, based on Director Thornborough's comments of the added labor involved, and just as importantly, in not that we can't flex, but we have represented this through many work sessions with the public in attendance that we were developing and rewriting code. You know, we've up until tonight, when an overlay has been referenced, it's only been referenced in casual passing. So I would think that our constituents would be looking to see this in 8.4 as code. So that's the way I would lean, is I would prefer to proceed down the path that we have been developing under the assumption that this is a code under 8.4 versus an overlay.
And I'll just say, excuse me, that I agree. I think it's going to be part of our zoning code. If it's in Chapter 4 where it already is, then that just seems to me just as effective, and it's easier. So, yeah, I think that's where I'm at on that.
I also lean to 8-4. So I think that's the answer.
Thank you.
Not because I lean that way, but because the consensus of the council.
Thank you.
To be very clear.
Okay, what's next?
Mayor, if we could decide if the change of uses to R3 is appropriate with the new zoning district ordinance or with the buffer ordinance.
Let me start by operationally distinguish the two when you're reviewing.
So, quick clarification, can I just jump? Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
If I remember correctly, I don't have it right in front of me right now, but obviously you had to create a new use column for RM, but you also, I believe, suggested edits to R3. So I guess I'm just trying to understand how we could either put them in the RM ordinance, or is the choice put them all in the RM ordinance or put them all in the R3 ordinance? Or, okay, so maybe that's what I should just ask.
Mayor, Council Member Rasmussen, currently they would be in both. So the RM ordinance, if we call it that, would have a new column with uses that are appropriate to RM. But the buffer ordinance, in addressing and making the purpose, correcting that, I guess, is part of what that does, would also have the R3 suggested changes to what's permitted or conditional. But there is a nexus with the RM in where there's the changes to the R3 are largely tied to the creation of the RM. So those uses could go in that table in the ordinance with RM is my question. If you want to how you want to deal with those potential changes to the R3 district. Are they tied to the RM, or are they right sizing the districts as it maybe the other districts? So you have the purpose statements, et cetera, that have stayed in the buffer code.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, it relates specifically to this.
Sure, come on up, Wendy.
The only question that I would ask council to consider would be that if you should make the decision to disassociate the R3 changes from the RM changes, I would ask that it not put those of us in the residential districts that we are intending to
Excuse me,
correct.
would the speaker make a record of their
yes.
name and address?
Oh, sure.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy Carver-Herbert, 8515 West Atwater Drive,
Thank
Garden
you.
City. Yeah, sorry about that.
Good catch.
So the question I would have is, would we, because those of us, including my property and those around me, are in our zone, R3 zone property, if we don't address the M3 or RM, could we be worse off with some changes made to the R3 zoning in the part of the city that we are attempting to resolve issues with the RM? So that would be my question to Director Thornborough, Mr. Mayor, is to please clarify for those of us, and maybe helpful to each of you, is if you choose to move forward with the changes that are being made in R3 and not take that as part of the M3, could that actually create something worse than we started when we started this whole thing a year ago.
Okay. Jenna, you want to respond?
Mayor, members of the council, I think, so the changes, the proposed changes to the uses in the R3, there are a number of additional permitted and conditionally permitted uses. And so I do suspect that some that within neighborhoods that are currently zoned R3 would not appreciate having additional potentially non-residential uses that are available. Some examples could include, but something like an eating establishment, a restaurant, etc. However, with that being
Director,
said,
are you on a page number
yes, certainly.
of the packet? Would you reference that?
Thank you. Mayor, Council President Page, if you look to page 116 of the packet in the staff report, there's kind of that clean version, the existing code versus proposed uses start, and then that goes through to page 119.
Thank you. 116 to 119.
We do know, and staff has heard from other residents within the R3 on the other side of town, where there have been multifamily structures, multi-use structures that have been constructed, and those R3 uses are very confining. And so they're stuck without being able to fill their non-residential spaces as well. So it really depends on the side of the town or what you're looking at, whether it's worse off or better off.
Yeah,
Suggest.
that gets to the heart of what kind of started a lot of this. When we started, is we were trying to segregate. We're trying to follow with latitude in one part of town in an R3 that we wanted to restrict in another part of town. So the R3s in west of Glenwood, the RM came about as, gee, if those were rezoned to RM, then that would provide some protection on density and building height and maybe some other things. So we also, I think, recognize that we have R3 zones west of Glenwood that are actually constructed to an R2 density. And one thing the council could consider is looking at a rezone of those areas to what they're actually developed to. So the scenario that an R3 that's currently in place that's constructed to an R2 standard, meaning less than 6 units to the acre, for the negative consequences of R3, if this passed as it's written right now, would require a redevelopment to what's existing now. So everybody can speculate on the likelihood of that, but the point is I'm just pointing out that there's another remedy if a group of residents in a neighborhood wanted that protection in case there was a redevelopment effort in their neighborhood, they request to be changed to an R2 zone to comport with what's actually built. And that kind of sets that apart. So there, Wendy brought up a good point, but you fix it over here, then you've defeated maintaining the liberty on the east side. So it gets clear back to where this thing all started. And it was contemplated that while we made it very clear that putting an RM on the books didn't rezone anybody's property, but it would allow property to be rezoned. That same concept is true if it's not RM that you choose to rezone something. You can rezone it to what it currently is developed in, especially, personal opinion, especially to areas that are currently developed as R2 in our established neighborhoods.
No?
So you can provide
Several of those.
yeah,
Yes.
you can provide a real protection there. And that could be initiated at any time. It doesn't have to wait for this process to go through. So, in the RM, if we get to that point, then we've got undeveloped properties. That the council could consider looking at rezoning those to establish some density and height protections in relation to the surrounding properties around those currently R3 vacant parcels. So,
Mr. Mayor, a quick question on rezoning, for an example, let's say, they wanted to rezone a property. They can draw that line and request it be, so if it's sitting in an R3 zone, they can say, well, we only want this portion of that R3 zone to be designated as R2 in your example, and leave the rest R3. We don't have to rezone the whole map as it's currently done. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
well, the area would have to be,
Just how that works.
the area would have to be designated, and I'd have to have Jenna school me a little bit on how that works, but we'd want to comply with the comp plan.
Right.
But I think the remedy, if you're afraid of your neighborhood's going to be redeveloped and you're going to have something that you don't want, we send out an invite, have a town hall to people that are interested in a certain area, have them come in and tell us whether they want to maintain the neighborhood the way it is or whether they'd be interested in having it redeveloped in a different way. I don't know.
So we could rezone.
Does anyone ever actually say?
Yeah, you can't spot zone, but I mean,
But you can say an area.
yeah, I think an area that that is developed to a
Current standard.
to a current standard that we have on the books. So if that's one of the big concerns, is something else is going to happen. I kind of went into this, right or wrong, probably maybe wrong, I don't know, but we have these undeveloped parcels, and we don't want to, the public, as I perceived it, didn't want undeveloped parcels to be built to the R3 standard that we have on the east end of town, adjacent to their lower density neighborhood. So,
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
agree, that's my interpretation. No, but you hit the other specific expectation and desire was to have our code be more in alignment with the comprehensive plan. And so that's part of where my mind is, A, I think it needs to go in code. B, I want it to be more in alignment with the comp plan. And C, if we can accomplish mitigation of concerns for established neighborhoods, fantastic. I think that's a very creative and interesting solution.
and we've got neighborhoods between Marigold and the river that are already zoned or developed as R2. We've got the whole
Yeah.
Millstream subdivision between Marigold and Chinden, or at least a significant area there that's in an R3 zone now that could be rezoned R2. So if you want to solve the redevelopment problem, I think you got a different set of tools in the toolbox. But the RM, I've always liked the RM because it doesn't impact the east end of town, and it creates, at least in its current form, a 15 unit to the acre maximum, as opposed to a 35 unit per acre maximum, and a height restriction. And I can't remember what it was, 30, 45 or 35, whatever it was. And then if that's segregated, it still would be impacted by the buffering ordinance that you're looking at if that's passed, because there'd have to be buffering relative to the magnitude of the project that's proposed in the RM zone. So if it's height and distance and step ups and whatever else, and the landscaping stuff. So I think there's a way to deal with most of these issues, and get the buffering code where you're happy with it, and then on the issues Wendy's raised, consider a rezone of those established areas to R2 so they don't get you don't have to worry about them being redeveloped in some other fashion.
Good idea.
So anyway, that's for $10, you can take that and buy a cup of coffee. I don't drink coffee anymore. Okay, Jenna, what else do we have to answer? So we're kind of.
Mayor, if I may, just one question. If we're moving forward with segregating the RM, the R3 uses, would it make more sense for that to be compelled by the creation of the RM, or be with the rest of the making the zone districts that are currently on the books match the comprehensive plan? Where is that more accurately addressed? Right now it's drafted, staff has that with the rest of the buffer ordinance. However, there is the potential that that hits the books and the RM does not, and then it would go to Ms. Carver-Herbert's point that the uses have changed and there hasn't been that right sizing followed through.
Okay, I want you to ask that again for me.
No,
I'm not saying you're unclear. I'm trying to think while you're talking. Go ahead and restate that.
Table 8.2b 2 has all uses allowed or prohibited or conditionally allowed as defined by Garden City use designations. Currently, staff has looked at all ordinance changes, including looking at all zoning districts and having them better match the comprehensive plan.
Okay, I'm with you.
In the buffer ordinance,
Okay.
1050.
Okay.
The new ordinance that's yet to have a number on it for the medium density residential also affects that table, but are the uses within R3 more tied to the creation of the new use, or are they tied to the buffer? Is it a question of where you would like that to see that those uses addressed and contemplated?
Well, I'm just throwing this out. So I think you could leave the buffer the way it is, because that's citywide right now. But the creation of the RM can have whatever restrictions we want to put in it then. So the RM could have its own set of uses, right?
Mayor, yes, thank you, but the R3 set of uses, is that tied to the RM creation, or is that tied to the citywide buffer?
I'd say isn't it the citywide buffer?
Thank you, Mayor.
That's what it is, because otherwise we're defeating the purpose of trying to leave the east end alone.
Okay.
And we have a mechanism to deal with the west end with the RM zone.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
may I bring up a specific example?
Yeah, you have to come back up here so we can catch you. Wendy Carver Herbert.
Yes, Wendy Carver Herbert again. So on page 117 of your packet, if you take a look at the uses of, for example, eating establishment, full service, under the existing code in R3 zone property, that would be a conditional use. If you choose to move forward with the R3 zoning and the conditioned uses as being proposed by staff today, all of the properties on the west side of the city that are currently zoned R3 would then become under the umbrella of the new R3. And so what was a conditional use prior to the enactment of this ordinance, should it go through all three readings, would now be a permitted use in R3 zone as opposed to a conditional use. So that's just one example, and as well as the eating established limited service. So in the existing code today, in R3 zone, it requires a conditional use in R3 zone. If you approve the R3 uses without the RM components, you have just essentially, again, upzoned the usage of R3 properties that will impact the neighborhoods in the city. And it would be done immediately as soon as this would be go into place. So I think if I'm understanding, that's why it's important, I think, to have clarity on whether you would like to move forward with the changes for the R3 district without the RM component. Or do you want to address the R3 changes at the same time that you will address the introduction of the RM district?
Okay, I got you. And I have a response for that, and that is, as I've said a couple times, the way this is, this deals with the issues on the east end of town. We can have a hearing on this, we can have a first reading, or we can have a second reading, but we can also initiate the different process, the legislative process, to get the RM designation in place. And I don't know how we can mess with the R3 and not trade one problem for another. Okay? I mean, hope everybody gets that. Okay. So, the council would have to at least consider, we get the RM, start through the legislative process to get it on the books with whatever restrictions the council wants or conditions for the RM, the uses, including the use table. And then the decision is, do you want to actually rezone some properties? Because this is all contingent upon taking an action to rezone properties. And if you do, you can hold the buffering ordinance in abeyance. There's no requirement that you introduce it immediately.
May I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Just so I can wrap my head around all that. So, we're changing some of the uses in the R3, right? We're making some conditional, some permitted, some not permitted, right? And
And we're trying to adapt.
to Wendy's point, that may change where she lives, right? So,
Well, I think her point is it may change the green fields, because that's what would happen pretty quick.
right, so I guess in terms of timing though, if they, and this is where my question is you had mentioned a remedy for their neighborhood or that surrounded is to get everybody in rezone, and let's rezone it what's currently built out at R2 and do that, rezone the area in her neighborhood to R2, and that kind of solves that problem because then they're not affected by the new R3 code. Can you do all of those in kind of tangent, or is, if she wanted to, for lack of a better word, mobilize in her neighborhood to say, hey, we want our neighborhood rezoned to R2 because that's what it's currently built out at. And we can hear that process and have the public hearing. Can we do all that at the same time as we're kind of shepherding this through, you know, to have by the third reading of the new code? You know what, or is it too much, I guess?
Well, an R2 rezone for a specific area is completely segregated. So,
Yeah, they're three different.
yeah, it's completely segregated. They can do that whether you do anything with the buffering
So
or
they
the
could do
RM.
this while we're doing this. at the
Sure,
same time.
sure. You know, I'm saying sure, you know, it's not a casual process. There's staff loading and some of those things. I'm just, well, the city can initiate it if they got a request from the citizens. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be from the neighborhood. There's no requirement. Boise just went through a massive rezone and just did it, you know. So I think that's the council perception of the will of the constituent, you know. So the city could initiate that stuff. But you know, it's easy for me to say I'm not overly concerned about the existing neighborhoods because somebody'd have to buy all those houses up, start tearing them down, and I mean, that's a heavy lift. So that's why I mentioned the remedy for the existing neighborhoods, if you're thinking long term, is to request that we get that their neighborhood, however you want to describe that, gets rezoned to what was constructed at, is R2. So that's that remedy. I think that's a viable remedy. Certainly can be done within a time frame that you know, you're not worrying about somebody buying the whole neighborhood up or even part of a neighborhood up and putting a restaurant in. There are some areas that are currently R3 that are developed R2 down near Chinden that I guess that could be a possibility, but the rezone of the existing, I think, is a remedy for that. It's the undeveloped portions that are R3 west of Glenwood that we could take care of with the RM. And you know, currently we're capacity limited with our sewer service west of Coffee Street. So
Mr. Mayor,
there's time to do these things. Yes.
it's a question for Ms. Thornborough, Director Thornborough. Beginning on page 116, table 82B1. There's the current use column, or current code column, where there's permitted uses, there's conditional uses, and then there's just hard no's on some uses. And then the kind of the proposed change for R3 in many cases, looks like 23 cases, goes from either conditional to permitted or straight from a hard no to permitted. What was the purpose of that?
Mayor, Council President Page, as mixed use developments and having R3 become the mixed use zoning designation, you would need more than just strictly residential single family uses to be allowed.
So it's enabling essentially for the west side. Is that what I'm
Mayor,
hearing?
Council President Page, that's correct. It would enable the growth that we're seeing, the desired growth from not enabling the west, but the east side.
Also, one other question, I'm sorry for bringing this up, just structurally, have you ever seen codes that, I guess an ordinance that establishes a new zone, but then incorporates the use table into something that's incorporated by reference to another section of code? So, in other words, could the RM ordinance establish the RM, but then at a later time we define the uses? Because that way, every time a use needs to change, we're touching one section of code instead of several, where tables are integrated into each.
Mayor, Council President Page, I'm not sure that I've ever seen it by reference, but the council could choose the order of adoption to adopt an RM zone first and delay the buffering. And that may get to maybe where I think your question's trying to get to.
I think what I'm getting, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I thought about that. What I maybe didn't make clear a few minutes ago was the RM could have its own table of uses completely and have little or no nexus to the R3 at all. So a lot of these things that you're talking about, I mean, the RM could be residential only, 15 units, I'm making this up, 15 unit maximum or 10 unit maximum, whatever you decided to. And by reference to another section of code would be the code that encumbers the entire city, which is the buffering zone, which is the buffering ordinance. So the buffering would be there, but the use table that is impacting R3 doesn't override the new uses you would put in your RM or your new conditions. So RM would have its own set of uses that did not include a restaurant or whatever else, however many other things. So I don't know why this has gotten a lot clearer in my mind, but at any rate, I think now go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, just not to beat this topic to death, but earlier we heard about the Idaho Constitution making a reference to one ordinance, one purpose. And it seems like we are having more than one purpose by changing the use table with density and height. Maybe that's not what's happening, but I think that's part of the complication.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding too, but if we take the RM out, then that becomes a sole ordinance on its,
Yes.
it's on its own feet. And changing the use table for the R3, the use table itself is changing the pieces in that, I think, is the purpose of the ordinance. So it's a single purpose. I mean, you can't do an ordinance just for the trees and just for the, I'm not sure the Constitution was trying to tell us that. But, so we put the buffering back in the buffering ordinance is what is what I think pulling the RM out does.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's an update to mirror what the market's telling us is going to happen down and has been happening on the east end of town by taking that R3. It almost makes me want to throw the whole thing in the trash can and take all the R3 on the east end of town and rezone it to mixed use. I mean, just
I'm all in.
Director
all
Thornworth.
300
I'm all
all 300 pages of it. But it still doesn't, it still wouldn't address, if we did that, just the buffering component, which I do agree at some point is going to be an issue for the vacant parcels west of Glenwood. And that those R3s, even if you rezoned the east end mixed use, the R3s over here still have, we still have that issue. And I'm going to need a bodyguard if I get very close to Jenna. So I'm just,
So,
Corey, you gonna
tell me
call
if,
Okay.
tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that in the RM ordinance, and I probably shouldn't call it that, but the RM ordinance, we'd have a column for all the uses in RM because we're creating a new zoning designation. Okay, that said, then in the buffer ordinance, it seems to me we could choose to have the entire table there and redo all of them if we wanted to, or just take it out and then do uses later if we wanted to.
Mayor, Councilmember Rasmussen, that's correct. You could do it that way.
Okay.
You could take that table out.
I mean, I'll just
With the
say,
exception from the RM, you'd need to establish
Right.
some uses.
I'll just say, since I'm talking about this right now, I would be fine with the use table being in the buffer ordinance and re-looking at all those now and just take care of that right now, if we feel as a group that that table should be re-looked at. That's kind of where my head's at right now.
Yeah.
But maybe as a group, we don't feel that way, but.
Well, let's talk about the east end for just a second, because we're trying to accommodate the market conditions that we're seeing east of Glenwood, east of Veterans Parkway. primarily. So that's what this table is intended to do. It's caught up in the issues that Wendy keeps bringing up. The net has caught all the R3 zone properties. So, and as Jenna just said a minute ago, really what we're doing is, this would allow the R3 to be developed like a mixed-use zoned area, which is what we have east of Veterans Parkway. So, you know, you can certainly, there's room to always debate whether what we see and what the market is trying to tell us east of Veterans Parkway is reflected in the proposed new uses here. That's always you can always have that discussion, but this, in our estimate, at least staff's estimation, is that this takes care of that and allows the momentum and what we're seeing down there and what we've been doing gymnastics on conditional uses when maybe they ought to be permitted and all that stuff east of Veterans Parkway, allow that to give it its head and allow it to continue. And then we've got to cut the net so that we aren't capturing west of Glenwood. And that's, to me, this takes care of the east end. Now, how are we going to take care of the west end? And the common factors that captures all of them, we talked about the river, they've all got the river, you know, we talked about the buffering components, the landscape, the setbacks from the river, mitigating height, all those things that apply citywide, even on the east end, although we don't have R2 properties on the east end that would trigger a lot of this stuff. And then your separate ordinance with the RM is more restrictive in the RM zone than the R3 zone. More restrictive meaning lower density, building height restrictions, and whatever else you want to throw in. And then we set about to make those changes on the affected properties. And whether that includes existing neighborhoods or not, I don't know. If I was in an existing neighborhood and wanted to get the ball rolling, I'd request that we rezone my neighborhood R2, because that's the way it's developed. I wouldn't wait. You could do that anytime. So my focus has been on the vacant parcels that are yet to be developed. And how do you prevent the concerns that we've had with the now approved project here by Pastry Perfection, the concerns over proposed development at the Boise Bible College? How do you deal with that going forward on what, half a dozen or so vacant parcels that could be developed as R3 much more densely than the surrounding neighborhood?
Right.
So I think you got put the tool in the toolbox, take care of the existing neighborhoods if that's what the citizens would like, and you just initiate the process as we have the staff capacity to do it. But the buffering pieces now, I think they work. I think they work for, on the uses, they work for half the city. So you got the other half to do, to fix. That's my 2 cents, and I'll be still, at least for a moment.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Director Thornborough, what remains to be answered tonight so that work can continue?
Mayor, Council President Page, those were you've discussed my 2 questions that I really had to move forward, so I do thank you for the discussion.
Thank you. Mayor, I think we might move on to the next agenda item.
That's adjournment. Okay, I entertain a motion.
There's a hint.
I move that we adjourn.
Got a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.